And so DPA wanted to provide leadership, support, education, direct action, to make sure that the general public is aware of the death penalty and the people involved in the system within the broader context of the anti-death penalty movement. I joined the DPA team back in January, having done some of this work in other positions and roles. But my first day on the job, I traveled to Terre Haute, Indiana, for direct action that had been planned there. And we were standing individual for some of the final executions under the Trump administration. DPA had been there for most of the last 13 that were executed. And so we traveled there just to ensure that people who are on death row being executed, they don't die alone. There's always someone there um, lifting their name and being with them in spirit. But let me be clear, I was not always an abolitionist. Um, you know, the death penalty is not something you hear about that's like, I don't know, a breakfast conversation, if you will. It's more, usually you have to have been impacted by it somehow to really have a deep um, understanding and concern, or even a learned position on it. But for me, there's kind of two things that kind of happen on this in my time and looking at this work. I heard from murder victim family members, people like Kristen Freilich, who you will hear from here shortly, that shaped my opinion on the issue. For me, hearing from people um, who've had loved ones murdered that can still have forgiveness through some terrible circumstances, who am I not to show that forgiveness? And further, I'm a member of faith, I'm clergy. But again, I have to shamefully admit it's not something that I always thought about. But now that I'm educated and informed, I am strongly, enthusiastically an abolitionist, and I want to share just a little bit more on the topic today for you guys, so that as you find yourself determining how you feel about this issue, whether you want to get engaged in this issue, you have a little bit more information to shape your thoughts. So we find ourselves in this moment. As I mentioned, I was in Terre Haute for the last two of 13 executions that were carried out between July 15th, 2020 and January 15th, 2021. And it was a breakneck speed, an unprecedented pace. Um, I won't list all the names. Usually I do run all of the names of those that were executed in that time, but we found ourselves executing a woman, and we hadn't done so in years and years and years, executing people with intellectual disability, executing people that hadn't killed anybody. It was such a hard thing to be a part of, a hard thing to witness. President Trump killed more prisoners in the shortest amount of time in over a century. Now, all of that is happening while public support of the death penalty is waning. Our current president, President Biden, he's rejected the death penalty through campaign promises. And we also have members of Congress who have introduced House Resolution 262 and Senate Bill 582, both Representative Presley and Senator Durbin. The piece of legislation is called the Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act of 2021. Say that fast. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how to get engaged in advocacy around those bills. But before we do that, I want to share a conversation with somebody who has been impacted by the death penalty. Again, for me, that was the thing that said, aha, I get it, and I get why we should be against it. We'll also share a few tools to show how you can get involved. So allow me just a little space to introduce Christian. Now, before I introduce Christian, it would be helpful to me, just so that we know who's listening in on the Zoom, just shout your name, where you're from, something about yourself in the chat, so that we just know who we've got in the room, and that just helps us. While you're doing that, Kristen Freilich is a licensed clinical social worker in Wilmington, Delaware. She served on the advisory board of Delaware citizens opposed to the death penalty for over 10 years, 3 years as board president. She has been a member of Murder Victim Families for Human Rights and Murder Victim Families for Reconciliation. After the murder of her brother and 4 of his friends in Connecticut in 1995, Kristen learned that the death penalty does not heal. Rather, it inflicts additional suffering and continues the cycle of violence. She has shared her story of loss and healing publicly since 2001, and will share a bit of that here with you today. Kristen, let me make sure I can see you, I can hear you. Awesome. Welcome, Emily. Welcome, Morgan from Tulsa, from North Carolina, living in New York. Awesome. So happy to have you. Kristen, let me just jump in with some questions. And then I'll give a few questions, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A from folks that are joining with us today. Okay. I guess first, Kristen, I want to know a little bit about your brother. What happened to your brother? Maybe share just a little bit about that.
Let me know if my connection's not working. I might switch over to my phone if we have trouble. But I grew up in Connecticut, family.
Kristen, I'm sorry, you're echoing. You're echoing. I think maybe you have two going at the same time, or turn the volume down.
Is that better?
Much better. Now, tell us. Much better.
Okay. So I grew up in Connecticut, big family. There were 8 kids. My youngest brother and sister were adopted. We took in foster kids and ended up adopting 2 of them. So my brother David was the second youngest, and we had him from the time he was an infant. He had birth defects, so he always had an artificial. He liked to go hiking. He joined the Boy Scouts. He was very friendly. And when he was
Kristen, we're
in his early 20s, he shared an apartment with. Say that again.
You're freezing a little bit. I'm so sorry for those that are with us. You gotta maybe have.
Can you hear me?
You're every.
Yeah, let me switch. Yeah, let me switch.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that better?
It is better. Let me try to spotlight and move. No problem. You know, when Zoom works, it's fabulous. When we have glitches, we work our way through. Okay, Kristen, do over. Start from the beginning. We want to know your brother, your family. Let's hear it.
Oh, okay. Oh, now I'm muted.
We hear you fine.
So yeah, big family, grew up in Connecticut. My brother David was the 7th of 8 of us. He and my youngest sister were adopted. And sorry, now I'm getting echoes. What's wrong here? Okay. So he had an artificial leg because he was born with birth defects. And it never slowed him down. He joined the Boy Scouts. He went for hikes. He had friends galore, very outgoing. And when he was 22, he shared an apartment with 2 other young men. Quiet town in Connecticut. Nothing much ever happened, low crime rate. And they had a rent dispute with their landlord. And I was living in Philadelphia at the time. And I got a phone call one night. Oh. Am I still in there?
Yes, much better. I removed
Oh,
your,
okay.
there was an
Oh,
echo.
thank you. I'm sorry.
You're welcome, no
So
problem.
yeah, I got a phone call one night from my father, and he said the boys are dead. And it was such a shock to me because I was thinking of them as just living their young adult lives, enjoying their lives, having their friends. At the time of the murders, the three young men were sharing that apartment, and they had a friend staying with them, and another friend had come over. So their landlord had murdered them, and then he had fled to South Carolina. Um, before he left, he burned down his own house that he owned. And there were other people living there as well. So going from just calm, quiet, um, small town life to the most unbelievable, enormous tragedy ever, um, that I could never have imagined, was a shock to our entire town, all the families, the five families. Um, it happened that the following day was the Oklahoma City bombing. So we were immersed in violence and death in personal ways, in national ways. It was just like mind boggling. Um, and of course, you don't have any preparation for anything like that. So we were really just sort of floundering, what to do, how do we feel, where do we turn, um, just, had no way of managing that. Um, our case was a death penalty case originally. Something that violent, people often want to see, big punishment for big harm. So that began, but it took over 3 years before they went to trial. They did apprehend the landlord within a couple of days. So he was in custody. No one else was at risk because he was in custody. But we were all still trying to grieve and trying to get our bearings and trying to live, each day. And I think I mentioned earlier, I was living in Philadelphia at the time. So, going back and forth, trying to figure out, um, just what to make of this whole thing. And because it's such a foreign experience, we were looking to the legal system for some direction and, kind of trust them as authorities who know, how things go, what to do, what's right. And so we were never asked whether we wanted the death penalty. It never occurred to me that I had any say over that. And so when I hear people say it's for the victims, it's for the victims, it's for the victims, I know that's not true because we were not asked. It's assumed, but I had never had to think about the death penalty before that happened. So this was all brand new to me. I hadn't had really any time to formulate an opinion on what made sense. I know some people, some victims' families, they get very angry, after an event like that. They really are looking for, that punishment. That didn't happen to me, and I think it often can go in another direction. I was really extremely depressed. I was really more focused on grief than on anger. And so in some ways that was a blessing for me, because it kept me somewhat separate from that legal process that just kind of grabs you up and carries you along. And so I was able to be a little bit more separate from that and focus on kind of the grieving, healing, piece, which I think is really obstructed by that legal process. You know, when people are just constantly telling you the status of the, you know, the legal case and the status of the person who committed the murders, you know, it's, you know, just so there's just so much energy like right in your face. It's hard to kind of settle in to where you might need to be that's not focused on that. And because it took 3 years, you know, it was kind of 3 years of just new information all the time, or complete lack of information, which was also really disorienting. You know, we didn't know what was going to happen when. And after a hugely traumatic event like that, where you lose control, you know, and you're trying to regain some sense of control, information can be really helpful. Not constant, you know, an onslaught of information that you might not want, but information at a pace that fits, you know, what you need. So, you know, there was at least one instance where I called the assistant district attorney to say, you know, what's happening, what's going on? Could you give us some information? You know, we were really seeking, a woman I know who works in the abolition community used the term legal finality, because to be kind of attached to the fate of a killer, you know, someone who has harmed you more than anyone else ever, is really painful and torturous. And to be able to disconnect from that, to detach from that, and to feel like I'm not just being kind of strung around, you know, but I can kind of figure out my own path forward, you know, even if that path starts with grieving and starts with depression and you know, that's where I need to be. That's what I have to deal with. And I can't do it if I'm forced to be sort of connected to this legal extravaganza. Midway through the trial, I want to say they dropped the death penalty. I think they just didn't have a case that was strong enough for death, quote unquote, because that has a higher standard. So, you know, after telling us this is the right thing to do, this is what we're pursuing, this makes sense, and us sort of buying into that, okay, like that's what needs to happen, this is how it works, suddenly that's gone. So again, we're blindsided, no one asks, no input from us. You know, so again, we're really victimized with loss of control. The only thing I can think of that was helpful to me about that whole legal process was being allowed to give victim impact statements. So we were allowed to describe the harm that had happened to us. We were allowed to use our own voices and speak our own truths. And even that was extremely restricted. They had to review our written statements in advance. We were told we should not be speaking to the defendant, you know, the man who killed my brother and his friends. We had to speak to the court, meaning the judge. So it wasn't as helpful as it could have been, because I needed to speak to that man. He was the one who harmed me. So we've created this system that was never meant to support victims. It was meant to punish criminals, punish offenders, punish people who committed crimes. And I think as, victims, the focus started to be on victims more, they sort of added that piece, cobbled it on where it did not fit, and did not really think about what would be more helpful to victims and victims' family members. So that's my experience, and kind of, the basics.
Yeah. Kristen, many folks that I talk to have had similar experiences to yours.
Yeah.
Just court proceedings that go on and on and on. Even when someone's about to be executed, the reason why it goes on to the wee hours of the morning is because of all these legal challenges. So imagine you're the family that's
Right.
trying to have some finality. It
Right.
just takes a long time to get to that point. I wonder, from this experience, you went through a process of grief and all of that, and your entire family for that matter. How did you get involved to working against the death penalty? When was it the moment that you felt like you needed to abolish this work? And then maybe tell us a little bit more about Delaware citizens opposed to the death penalty.
Sure. So at some point, because it was a death penalty case, I became more interested in the death penalty. And so when there were, talks or articles, I could learn more and try to understand more. And I came to learn about Murder Victims Families for Reconciliation. And they had a conference in 2001 in Boston. And I went to that conference, and it was the most unbelievable place. That, there were just hundreds of people from every different angle of the death penalty. There were victims' family members like me. There were people who had been wrongfully convicted, and there were their family members of those who had been executed, attorneys, clergy. So in the legal system, people who would be adversaries, we were all there to try to heal. We were all there to try to heal, which was completely absent from that criminal legal process. Healing was not considered, which I think is so, I don't know, devastating that that's not considered. What will help people heal? So from that event, I met people who said, I was living in Delaware by that time, and they said, go back to Delaware, you need to meet Barbara Lewis and Ann Coleman with Delaware Citizens Opposed to the Death Penalty. And Barbara Lewis had a son on death row, in Delaware. His sentence has since been commuted, thank goodness. And Ann Coleman's daughter had been murdered, and they had joined together in solidarity and started speaking all over the world. So I was lucky enough to meet them and other people who were involved in death penalty abolition work. And over the years, I started learning more and more how initially the death penalty seems so simple. It's a bad person does a bad thing and they need to get, severely punished for it. It seems so simple, and it seems so right, and it seems so balanced on its surface. And I learned it doesn't work like that at all. It doesn't work like that at all. There are so many other pieces to it. There are so many unintended consequences. There are so many people who are harmed in that process. The focus is not on healing. Most people who commit murders are not given the death penalty. And even if they are given the death penalty, they're often not executed. It's enormously expensive, more expensive than life without parole. There's all kinds of social harms to it. So I joined Delaware Citizens Opposed to the Death Penalty and just got more involved. Our mission has been public education, legislative work. Delaware has a death penalty. It's not active right now because in 2016, the Delaware Supreme Court said that it was unconstitutional, that judges were making decisions that should be made by juries, and juries were making decisions non-unanimously, and something as important as the death of a human being should not be non-unanimous. So currently, we don't have an active death penalty, but we do have a large group that would like to have the death penalty come back. There's some activity to add, to forbid the death penalty and add that to Delaware's state constitution. So that may be happening. We're hopeful that things will move in that direction. We're trying to educate people that the death penalty does not bring what we kind of think people think it does not increase public safety. It doesn't increase safety for law enforcement officers. It costs, doesn't reduce crime, doesn't support victims. So we're trying to educate people and educate legislators that there are other ways to do those things. There are other ways to make our communities safer. There are other ways to protect law enforcement and corrections officers, and they cost less. So there are other ways to support victims and their families. And we have to start looking at prevention, because by the time you're getting ready to convict somebody and sentence them to death or execute them, if that was the solution to murder, I mean, we're just doing like one drop in an ocean. And if we work on prevention, we can make big changes much more efficiently, less costly, more effectively, and keep that focus on healing.
Yeah. So, we are at the Coalition for Criminal Justice. I wonder, just with your experience as both a murder victim family member, a social worker, what do you think is the role of the criminal justice system? I mean, you've laid out compellingly all the trouble. What is it?
That's a good question. I mean, the criminal justice system, and I'm not an expert in that. I'm a social worker, and I'm a psychotherapist. I became one after, my brother's murder, specifically, coming out of that and going to grief groups and therapy and, getting the support I needed to heal. That adversarial piece, to protect people's rights, certainly. To not let the government become more excessively punitive. Some of the statutes in place are supposed to protect people's rights. Punishment is, people often kind of accuse me, how come you don't want punishment for killers? And I think, of course I want punishment for killers. Of course I want punishment. We should all want punishment. We all should want accountability. But I don't want to just punish people. I want things to be better. I want to live in a world that's better and safer and more healthy. So I think if we see criminal justice just in kind of an isolated way, that's not good enough. That's way too narrow. We have to attach criminal justice to larger societal systems. We have to see how criminal justice functions in society. We have to look at the problems. We have to keep coming back. What are our goals? What are our goals? What are our goals? If our goal is safety, is our criminal justice system helping with that? Or is it, just wasting our money or increasing the harm? So, coming back to things like safety, well-being, health, community, prevention, the criminal justice system isn't the driver of those things. So we have to keep that in mind and connect it with larger systems, I think.
Thanks for that. I wonder if there are questions from the floor, from the audience. Anybody? I'm happy to get your question by the chat, or I'm hopeful that you can just turn on your mic and turn on your video and ask your question. Well, let me just, while folks are thinking through their questions, Virginia, oh my gosh, epic moment. I gotta tell you that, I am newer to death penalty abolition work, but I feel like as an advocate, I get to come in and reap the rewards of all of the work that has been laid up until this point. So you have Virginia, who I believe the first death penalty execution happened in our country. It's a southern state.
Right.
I might get this wrong. I think it's the second, either the first or second most murdering state in our country. And we have a governor on Wednesday, yes, days are coming together. Wednesday, who signs a bill to end the death penalty in Virginia. And I was literally glued to the Facebook Live, taking in every word, just super excited for Virginia to have made this decision. Kristen, tell me how you felt about it. Just give me your perspectives.
Wow. What an incredible event that really speaks to how things are changing. 10 years ago, I could not have imagined Virginia abolishing the death penalty. Could not have imagined it. It just seemed so entrenched. Politicians were getting elected because they supported the death penalty, and now they're getting elected because they oppose the death penalty. It's just become such a huge change. Victims, family members are speaking out. In Virginia, there was a voice of letters by victims' family members saying, we oppose the death penalty. We don't want this anymore. It's not good for us. I worked in the Connecticut campaign to abolish the death penalty, I want to say 2012. And there was a big victims family member groundswell there too, saying, this isn't helping us. Listen to us. This is not helping us. And I know not all victims family members feel that way. But the voices of family members who oppose the death penalty were never acknowledged in the past, were never heard in the past. So that has become a huge change as well. And the fact that it's Virginia in the South, because the death penalty has such a strong connection with racial violence and slavery, the fact that Virginia is abolishing the death penalty is opens the door to acknowledging, directly acknowledging that connection. And recognizing we can't keep going. We can't keep going like this. It has to change. So it really was incredible. I'm thrilled.
Am I? We got a question in the chat, Kristen. Thanks so much for sharing your experience.
Sure.
And in your work, have you spoken with fellow victims' families who feel differently than you about the death penalty? And how have you broached that conversation about your beliefs with them?
Yes. Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations with victims' family members who feel all different kinds of ways. Um, a lot of victims' family members do support the death penalty. And I'm I can really understand that feeling. When something huge and devastating happens, it's like I want something to stop that. I want something to change that. I need something big. I need something like, strong. And when someone offers you the death penalty, that looks mighty good. That looks mighty good. Like that's really going to change things. It's really going to make me feel better. It's the right thing to do. Um, so I understand why that's so appealing to people. Um, it it happens in ways that make victims' family members feel better so extremely rarely that as a public policy, it it just fails. It just fails. Only certain types of murders have been eligible for the death penalty. The vast majority of cases that are eligible for the death penalty have white victims. Um, the vast majority of cases that are eligible for the death penalty have, the families have funds available, and uh, it's just a really ineffective policy. So, at that micro level where it's a specific family member, a specific family, and they have really strong feelings, I can totally understand their feelings. I can really empathize with their feelings. But as a policy, if we step back and look at the larger, the way it's administered, it fails on every level. It fails on every level. So I think we have to look at the bigger picture when we're making policy, but we can also be empathetic to people and the devastation they feel and begin to offer other ways of healing. Connecting your healing to the fate of the person who hurt you most is that's a big risk, and it often does not work the way people hope it will. Yeah, it often doesn't make them feel better. Even after an execution happens, it doesn't make people feel better. They have to wait a long time. Meanwhile, that's suffering. And that being, linked with the person who hurt you the most, is ongoing, affecting every other area of your life, limiting your ability to focus on your own healing and grief. I think we have to approach it in different ways, but always with empathy to, the suffering that people have gone through.
Yeah. Kristen, you raised something that we haven't talked about yet, and it is about the implications of race. For me, that's part of the reason why I'm very active in this work, is just the disproportionality of people of color, poor people that find their way on death row.
Yeah.
Uh, for me, because prior to this work, I did a lot of advocacy for children. And so lots of systems for children. So when you see adults that have made sometimes some heinous crimes, some horrible decisions, but you see all of these systems that have failed them up until this point. You see
Right.
child welfare, you see they didn't get diagnosed with developmental delay, or
Right.
all of these touches to these folks that have adults that didn't have the love and care that they needed when they were young people.
Right.
So that's something I wanted to throw out there as part of why I engage in this work. And then as it relates to folks that are innocent, I mean, dying is final. You can't bring anybody back. And so I really appreciate your comments about other victim families that even you get to the point where a person is executed, that doesn't necessarily bring you the healing that you're looking for, because it
Yeah.
doesn't get your loved one back.
No,
Nothing
right,
that can replace
right.
that void. But we just learned that our count for people who were innocent has risen to about 185 people that were literally on death row, that some of them had dates to be executed, that for whatever reason, legal challenges or whatever, that were shifted here and there, that were completely innocent.
Yeah.
And just for me, all of you guys that are in this conference talking about criminal justice, we know that there are significant flaws to a system. So to say that our system's not perfect, and so now we want to execute someone to die, we can't be 100% sure that we're making the right decision because our system is so flawed. There's so much prejudice. There's so much. I'm passionate about it. So let me
Yeah.
calm down. Um,
No, I love it. I love the passion.
What other questions might people have out there on the floor? Just any thoughts for questions for either Kristen or I at this point? You guys are awfully shy.
I can speak some to that innocence piece.
Yes.
Yeah, when it gets to 185 people who have been wrongfully convicted in the United States, um, and every time I think about somebody who, an innocent person who's been convicted, I think about the actual person who, murdered, who hasn't been convicted, and who is walking around, and how little effort there is to, shift gears when someone has, there's evidence of innocence, that we don't say, oh gosh, let's really take a look at this whole process and see how we can make it better, and let's really get busy and find that actual killer, because we want to hold that person accountable. That doesn't happen. And in fact, a lot of the states that have high numbers of people who've been wrongfully convicted of murder, like Florida comes to mind, it doesn't make them shift course. They just keep running that death machine, execution. Let's execute more people. There's all these errors. And yet they don't say, oh, all these errors, let's take a look at this system that's creating all these errors. They just keep pushing it through. So I think that speaks to how little safety is considered. It's not about safety. It's not about convicting the correct person. There's other things going on. And I think a lot of it has to do with power and politics. So I think we really have to, this whole process has been kind of, changed from what it was even originally. Well, maybe it hasn't changed. Maybe it was always about power. So, we're just starting to recognize that maybe, and we need to really take hard looks at that and make some changes.
The brother that was talking in the previous session that we got to hear a little bit was talking about the power over Black bodies. And when you look at the disproportionality, it is very much that. And, when I was in Terre Haute, one of the executions that I remember more vividly, there's always a minister of record and there's media that go in to witness the final moment, the execution. And the minister of record, when we're at these vigils, they tend to come back and address the advocates and those that are there at vigil, and sharing what the last moments were and what happened in the room. And this was Corey Johnson, who had intellectual disability, who was executed. And as the minister of record came out to share with us, what happened in the room, he talked about the cheering that happened in the room when he was declared deceased. And it enraged me so much because the vision for me became lynching. Corey was a Black man. It went right to the time of picnics and where clapping and as people are hanging on trees. And so certainly for me, our country has this bloodthirst that is unquenchable, except for us as the people, moving power, people in power, moving politicians, moving elected officials to do what the general public now sees as just grossly wrong.
Yeah.
Um, there was a comment, a question, I'm sorry, on that point. Oh, wait, I'm moving too fast here. What, Logan, I'll get to your question and I'll come back to yours, Emily, because it went up and I don't want to mess up my screen. What is the most effective way, in your experience, to push legislators towards death penalty abolition? We have the proof of errors, the idea that some victim family members don't feel like it is justice, the high cost of death row incarceration, at least 3 times more than regular incarceration. To me, it seems like those 3 things are enough, but obviously it isn't. Kristen, do you want to address that one?
Yeah. Legislators are coming from their own position. They have their own priorities. So kind of keeping in mind, they want to stay in a decision-making role, that they have, kind of, they're in a power structure. They want to stay in a power structure. Sometimes education with facts is helpful. Some people will come along if you present them facts that, death penalty costs far more tax dollars than life without parole. But a lot of times it's stories that are more effective. So victims' family member stories can be really persuasive. Also, people who have been exonerated from death row, because that narrative can really bring home how all the expectations that people have about the death penalty don't pan out the way we think they do. And they really, if people can have a change of heart and accompany it with a change of mind, that can be a powerful combination. But I think a lot of times it takes building relationships with legislators, because until they open up to that new information, that new feeling, that new, facts, they might stay entrenched in their position because, they'll stay at that surface level where it seems on the surface like this makes sense. So yeah, stories and relationships, I think, go a long way.
And I would just add that, it depends on who you're talking to. I have about a decade of experience in lobbying Congress and the state legislature. I live in Ohio. And in Ohio, we have a super majority of conservatives. So when I talk about the death penalty to conservatives, I have to lead with conservative values. You know, so I have to talk about how fiscally more sound it is not to execute people. I have to, some of our conservatives are faith forward. So, I have to have maybe their priest talk to them directly about why this is wrong and why biblically this is not the way to move forward. Frankly, I think the issue is not necessarily what we share with legislators. It is, there are so many competing priorities. And the death penalty is not like something sexy that you want your name associated with. You're thinking about your electability, if you align yourself with this. And so it is, how do you get public officials to understand there's an urgency around this issue when they're looking at other issues? So, I hope that gets to some of your question, Logan. Yes, we have all the sound arguments for why this shouldn't be, but within a political process, there are so many other things. I'll give you a perfect example. And maybe, Kristen, you can talk a little bit about the opportunity that exists with President Biden and the federal Congress. But we know that President Biden is on record saying we will not execute anyone under his administration. And that's great. So that means we've got 4 years at least, right? But then to end it permanently, because what can happen is he could be out of office, someone else can come in and start executions again, they can resume them. So if you get it codified federally, you have a better chance of, ending the death penalty. And if the federal does it, then the states, become more likely to adopt this. But what we've seen is in this time, while you have a president who says we don't favor executions, you also have these mass shootings.
Mhm.
And so, as you're positioning this bill to be the fourth, and we're, giving this pressure, and yes, let's pass this bill, you still have the world that is having other things happen. And when you see, gosh, when you think of someone that's doing mass killings, you're like, this is the worst of the worst. And there has to be a response. And then it becomes, do we talk about guns? And how does death penalty play in that conversation? So it is not only about what are our points that we can put forth, it's also around the broader context for how we're advocating and moving policy forward. Here's a question. How do you think public officials have weaponized tough on crime stances to inspire fear in voters, like the infamous Willie Horton commercials? Kristen?
Yeah, it's been quite a long time since the Willie Horton commercials. And generally that seems to have shifted overall, that it's not just, an easy sell, tough on crime, let's get the death penalty, bada bing, bada boom. Overall, violent crime has gone down, but you can still see that fear-based thinking is a very powerful thing. And so anyone who wants to support the death penalty can easily use some of the, mass shootings, the sort of horrifying events that we don't really know how to process. We just have really big fears about it and big feelings about it. And we're looking for something big to match the intensity of that. We're not really good as a society at managing big feelings. We go right into like fear and then anger and hate and, boom, violence. So we have to get better at slowing down. And that's actually one thing the criminal legal system is a bit better about, is slowing things down, even though people hate that. But it gives us a chance to pause and kind of let our feelings come down a little bit so we can start thinking again. What are we doing? What do we need? How did this happen? We can kind of broaden our lens, because at the beginning our lens is so small. We have to punish, we have to annihilate, we have to, but if we can get a bigger one, and that's when we look at other factors that are contributing. How do we deal with that? How do we build a healthier society? How do we build a safer society? How do we help people deal with trauma and poverty and, so many pieces, contributing factors in murder, homicide, mass shootings. So it really takes a lot of thinking. When there's big events, we're not doing much thinking, we're doing a lot of feeling and reacting. And if we kind of slow down and keep the conversation going and expand our lenses, that will help us get back to meaningful solutions about how to help people heal and help societies be healthy.
Yeah. Well, we often say at Death Penalty Action that this work isn't about convincing people to see our point of view. It's more about mobilizing the people who share our point of view, getting people to actually do something about this issue that's not always top of mind. It's not breakfast conversation. It's not something that everyone just says, I want to do something about it. So let me shift just a minute to share a little bit with you in case you want to get engaged with our work. And I am going to share my screen. Let's see here. Boom. You can go to our website, deathpenaltyaction.org, and you will find places to take action. Let's go with current campaigns, because we really want you to go and sign some of our petitions, um, sign on our sign-on letters, particularly around the federal work. So there's a US Congress petition. You can write your member of Congress. If you're a part of an organization, you can sign on to our sign-on letter. You know, we had this full push. Our vision for this work was, you know, always we knew kind of aspirational, if you will, that in the first 100 days of this administration, that they would do something related to the death penalty. But as I said, you know, oftentimes when you're dealing with policy, things prop up. There are urgent things that interrupt. So we're going to keep fighting for this until we see it through the finish line, until we're able to go back to Terre Haute and tear down the death house. You know, that is what we want to do. We want to tear it apart and never have anyone go back through that chamber again. But you can write your member of Congress, real simple, right? You're just gonna put your name and all of this in, and right away. You know, we have maybe a little over half of our petition goal, but what happens is we actually deliver our petitions. This is not like a, you filled it out and who, you know, look at what we've done online. We deliver them to Congress, and we are working very closely with Congresswoman Presley and Senator Durbin on their legislation. I see a chat, so let me see what that's, let me stop my share for just a second and see what the chat is saying. Yeah, I can share the link in the chat. I will do so here in just a second. I want to conclude our time. We've just got 3 more minutes with a video. But Kristen, do you have any closing thoughts before I get to the video? And before you answer that, also know that we have internships. So if this is something that you really want to take a deeper dive in, we're always looking for organizing and communications interns. Our current interns, their last day is April the 30th. We haven't posted the new assignments, so you could get in right away. Email us. I will put the email in the chat if this is something that you think you want to be a part of. Of course, we're a national organization. I'm in Ohio. Kristen, you're in Delaware?
Delaware.
Yep, Delaware. You know, we're all over. So your location doesn't bother us in the world of Zoom, but you can join a team that is very passionate about this work. Kristen, give your final comments, and then I'll show a video to end us, end our time together.
I guess I will say the death penalty is not simple. It's very complicated. And I would encourage anybody who's working, you know, remotely in the death penalty arena, think about what we really want. What are the end goals? We want accountability, which the death penalty is poor at providing. We want support for victims' family members, which the death penalty is poor at providing. We want public safety and law enforcement safety, both of which the death penalty is poor at providing. We want equal equity, death penalties poor at providing. So come back to basics. What kind of society do we want to live in, and what kind of, you know, legal system can support that?
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for the team that's organized this. Our final thoughts are as follows. Well, they were as follows. Let me get back to where we need to be. I'm sorry, just give me 1 second. I don't know what, I'm going to close boxes. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to go to the home page. It's like my computer does not want to cooperate. We have gotten, you know, this has not been the smoothest technology day. And it's been sitting here waiting the whole time. Let me close out, okay? And then I'm going to restart it all together. So sorry about it.
There we go, reboot, there we go.
Yeah, that's all the tech folks are going to tell us anyway. It's just start all over again. Reset. Have you reset?
Yeah.
I can't, okay, here we go. Tell you how much we appreciate the opportunity though. All right, and
There we go. Hey, there we go.
The death penalty is cruel, unjust, and has no place in any society. Last year, in the midst of a deadly pandemic that took countless lives, the Trump administration resumed federal executions for the first time in 17 years. What followed was an unprecedented state-sanctioned killing spree, unlike anything we'd ever seen in this country. In only 7 months, the Trump administration executed 13 people. That's more than the total number executed over the previous 6 decades. A horrible and ruthless legacy to leave. In Trump, we saw the worst example of what a change in power could bring, which is why it is essential that Congress legislate to fully end the death penalty, codify its abolishment into law, and prevent a future president from reinstating it down the line. State-sanctioned murder is not justice, and the death penalty goes against everything we claim to stand for as a nation. And at a time when more states across the country have outlawed the death penalty than ever before, more Americans oppose the death penalty, and over 70% of nations across the globe have abolished it. We must follow suit and do what's right. Death Penalty Action is calling on members of Congress to pass my Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act of 2021 to abolish the federal and military death penalty once and for all. It's what the people want. It's what the nation needs. And it's what we must do.
thank you again. Please join with us. Have a good day.
Thank you both so much again for that amazing presentation. For everyone else who is still on the line, we're going to have another event in 15 minutes from the Prison Journalism Project. So excited to welcome them. Again, thank you, Brandy and Kristen, and the whole team at Death Penalty Action for putting together such an informative, heartfelt, and touching presentation. Kristen, hearing about your experience, especially, like, it was just like such an insight that I really don't think people can get besides from hearing it. So thank you so much for that. Hey. All right. So if everyone, if like you're
okay. Yukari, you let me know when you pull it up.
All right. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And I'm hoping everyone can see that. Hi, I am Shaheen Pasha, and I am one of the co-founders and co-executive directors of the Prison Journalism Project. And this is my partner, Yukari Kane, co-founder and co-executive director of the Prison Journalism Project. Thank you all so much for having us at this really, really important summit. I want to kind of give you some figures to kind of think about at first. If you think about it, we look at the world, the US has 5% of the world's population. And these are numbers you may know, 5% of the world's population, but actually 25% of the world's prison population. And that is an almost inconceivable number when you think about the number of people that are behind bars today. When we think about this population, we think about the sheer numbers. 2.3 million is the one that we hear a lot about. But when you break it down even more so into the demographics, Black Americans, 50% more likely than white Americans to have an incarcerated family member. Families with less than 25,000 in income are more than 60% likely to have an incarcerated family member than those with over $100,000 in household income. 1 in 5, I really want you to think about this, 1 in 5 have had a parent sent to jail or prison. And the US has the highest rate recidivism in the world. And the reason we wanted to share this with you is for you to kind of realize that we hear the number of 2.3 million, but the impact is so much broader on the entire country as of just a population. So I really wanted to get those kind of figures percolating in here just to kind of to explain to you why what we do we think is so very important right now. In a nutshell, and I don't think anybody's really going to disagree with this, the US mass incarceration system is broken. It is a system, as I keep mentioning, 2.3 million people. That is the size of a small country. That is quite literally the size of Botswana. And that entire population has been hidden for a very long time. And that is why what we do at the Prison Journalism Project, we feel is a very necessary thing. Yukari?
Yeah. So the good news is that there's been more attention on criminal justice issues. Before, there's been great journalism work by the Marshall Project, ProPublica, newspapers like the Washington Post, et cetera. And so there is more attention. The challenge is that most stories in the mainstream media are are still written by outsiders with limited and often controlled access to the world inside prisons. It obviously requires approval by prison administrations, and you only see what you're allowed to see, and the perspective from inside is largely missing, and that's and the question that we kind of asked ourselves was, is there a way to unleash the enormous power of journalism to elevate the voices so often left out of the public conversations about justice and imprisonment in our society? And Shaheen and I have taught journalism in prisons, and we know that there are stories, and we know that there are writers who are interested in writing journalism, and they don't, and they're still not part of the public conversation. And we just felt that there's definitely stories that can be that should be written by the outside, and it can only be written out from the outside because of access to data, investigative reporting, et cetera. But the voices inside need to be part of this conversation as well, and their stories shared. And so that's why we created the Prison Journalism Project. And so our mission in a nutshell is this: that if we take incarcerated writers and provide them with journalism training, we think that we can help enable credible journalism from inside that will demand the attention, that will shed light in a way that can't be written from the outside, and that changes the narrative, and that is what helps ultimately change policies, change the system. And this is our mission, to train incarcerated writers and those in communities affected by incarceration, so they can tell stories about their world and reach a mainstream audience using the tools of journalism, which is gathering and testing facts, writing with nuance and texture. And the Prison Journalism Project is putting the power of journalism into the hands of incarcerated men and women, and our goal is to amplify their voices. And our ultimate goal is to create the first nationwide network of prison journalists who can write about the system from the inside and fill that missing gap in the conversation. And we think, based on, we started about a year ago, and based on last year's work, we're very confident that this is possible. Just a little bit of background about us. I am currently an adjunct lecturer at Northwestern University's Medill School. I used to teach at UC Berkeley's J School, and I got into this space because I started teaching at San Quentin News, which is the only entirely prisoner-run newspaper inside prisons in the country. And it really just completely changed my perspective. I think before I started doing this, I was a business journalist for about 20 years. And, I knew a little about the criminal justice system. I was against the death penalty. I knew it was broken. I knew that it was overly punitive particularly for Black men. But I wasn't really touched by it. And it was an issue that wasn't in my radar. And going into San Quentin and teaching really changed that perspective for me completely. it broke stereotypes, and journalistically, I was there were just incredible stories inside, and I think that's the power of the stories from inside, and that's why I believe in what we do.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here, just give you a little bit of background about myself. So as you can see, I'm an assistant professor right now at Penn State University, and my actual focus is on mass incarceration and prison education. It's about building journalism networks behind the prison walls. For me, though, my career, like Yukari's, it was very much founded in journalism. I've been a journalist for over 20 years, and actually I'm a graduate of the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism. So, there's that Columbia background too. But, I wasn't, for a long time, even though I covered legal stories in the Supreme Court and court cases for like major publications like CNN and Dow Jones, I don't think I really actually understood it until I myself became impacted by it. And I think that's true of a lot of people that kind of do start getting interested in this work. And it's when your own eyes become opened. You want to move it to the next one, Yukari?
Yep.
Just to give you a little bit.
Just start.
Yeah, I just want to kind of go back to the board
Okay.
for a second. And the reason I wanted to do this before I tell you my story is that we have an amazing board of advisors that believes in us. We have advisors from major journalism schools. We have advisors that are in the criminal justice advocacy space. We have advisors that are in the Department of Corrections space, journalists. And what I think that kind of shows is that when all of these types of individuals see the value, that shows that there's a larger opportunity for us to be able to do the work that we're trying to do, which is to get these voices out and actually have our men and women be the ones leading the conversation when it comes to journalism. Which brings me back to my story. And this is really where it begins. The New Jersey State Prison, as I mentioned, I was a journalist for a long time covering these issues. And then my best friend, my childhood best friend, who I dearly love, he wound up becoming arrested. He was arrested and he wound up being incarcerated for 150 years inside New Jersey. He's still there. And that kind of opened my eyes. It made me realize that I never actually questioned what happened once people went into the system, and that's in part because the media shows us the crime, shows us everything leading up. And then once they go inside, everything stops. And what I saw when I went inside myself was a person with immense talent, immense potential, and so many stories from inside that absolutely nobody knew about. And it kind of lit a fire inside of me that, this is something that we need to bring out. And it's something that stayed with me for many, many years, even as I went on in my career. And it wasn't until I actually decided to switch gears and become a professor full-time and a journalist as a freelancer that I had the opportunity to do that and to actually start creating classes behind bars that dealt with journalism. And there was a lot of skepticism. A lot of places were extremely, nervous. The first place I went was Hampshire County Jail, and they loved the idea of teaching. They did not like the idea of teaching journalism behind bars because it's scary. And what I showed them and what they learned was that it was immensely valuable from so many perspectives. But for the men inside, it showed them that their stories mattered. It gave them social skills. It gave them writing skills, this immense amount of opportunity to be able to share their stories and to have tangible skills to take out when they re-entered society. And remember, 95% of people that go behind bars re-enter society. I'm going to the next one. So it was something that kind of inspired me to, okay, this is something we can do. We can make this a national initiative. We should make this a national initiative. And so I was really lucky. I was able to, I won a fellowship from the Harvard Knight Nieman Fellowship to do this, to learn how to do a curriculum and a textbook to create this kind of work. And everybody kept mentioning to me that I needed to go to San Quentin News and that I needed to meet this woman, Yukari. So I went in 2018 to basically talk to the guys about how they did what they did. How did they do the journalism from inside? What were the challenges? And in the process, Yukari and I met. And as we talked, it was just like instant synergy. We realized that this is what both of us were kind of working our ways towards. And the entire Prison Journalism Project actually came out of the car ride back from San Quentin, back to San Francisco. So this is actually our first meeting. And what's great about this is a lot of the people in here, they all, pretty much all of them work with us still. So we are still very much involved with them. Okay. And when we initially started thinking about this, we thought about it from, curriculum, educational, textbook, and that was it. And then the pandemic hit. and everything shut down. And we realized how isolated we were on the outside. And it just made us think how much is going on behind the walls that nobody knows about. And that's when we decided to tell those stories. We basically put up ad hoc Medium site up and just put out a call for submissions. We were lucky we had some support from the American Prison Writing Archive and Prison Legal News, and they put out a call, and we were instantly inundated, flooded with information about what was happening behind bars, what their fears were, what their concerns were, what what was quarantine like, was it even possible? And as those stories started rolling in, so many other things happened. George Floyd. And that kind of opened up this whole other floodgate of stories about racial reckoning, et cetera, that our men and women really, really wanted to talk about. And that just kind of made us realize the importance of this work and how much broader the storytelling could be and how we could kind of be a part of that. So Medium, we outgrew, I think, in a month, maybe in 3 weeks. And we wound up putting a whole website together from scratch and launching a publication. And it's just been an amazing journey since then, since April of 2020, when we started publishing these stories. So, if you'll see, some of the stories are basically, as I mentioned, COVID-19 reports, journalistic tellings, observations from inside about what the situation is from the men and women who are living it. So what COs are doing, what other incarcerated people are doing, how they're impacted by the actual disease, whether it's having to obtain solitary or any of that. But the stories grew from there and start tackling, as I mentioned, other types of stories as well. We had them, in addition to the journalism, kind of do these op-eds. And I'm really super proud of this piece in particular, because the writer, Steve Brooks, who was one of our first guys, again, he started with us when we were a Medium site. He wrote this for us, and he won the 2020 Society of Professional Journalists, Northern California Excellence in Journalism Award for commentary. And I really want to emphasize this. He is the first individual who is incarcerated to win this award. Ear Hustle has won awards from them as a group, but this was the first one that won, and he beat out a lot of really impressive competition, given just the depth of his work and the op-eds he wrote about what life was like inside San Quentin during this period. So we did op-eds. We also did stories from places that many people have no idea. This story from death row, death row is a black box. We don't hear a lot. And we are actually really fortunate that some of our writers are sharing their stories, because it gives this insight and this window into this very, very, even hidden within a hidden environment. So we have stories from death row, and this is probably one of my favorite stories, because it also shows just life, human interest stories, life in prison. We hear about all the horrible things, and there are so many horrible things, but there's life, there's community, there's family, there's friendship, there's humor. There's so many things behind bars, because it is a community, it's a whole world. So you're going to have life there. And we try to highlight those stories as well, to really emphasize that at the end of the day, when people go behind bars, they don't stop living. They have different stories that are coming out of that life. Breaking news is something we are really passionate about. That's a fairly new thing. We're starting to get new reports out, and that's something we're absolutely trying to build as we are creating this network of prison journalists, to really kind of get an idea of by the minute what things are happening. And we are fortunate, we have some individuals that are able to get out to us. We are actually planning to build a team of correspondents from inside, and to hopefully to get more breaking news like this. At the end of the day, what it really, really comes down to is journalism, intentional, responsible, and well-crafted journalism from within. We believe that that is how you're going to break the stereotypes that are there. That's how you're going to bring transparency into this very opaque system. And ultimately, that is how you drive change. As Yukari said, everything is narratives by people on the outside. I always use this example. I'm going to use it again. 2.3 million people is the size of a country. Yukari and I were both foreign correspondents. We went into other countries and we reported, but there was already correspondence from inside, people reporting on their own countries. Prison is completely different. You have something the size of a country with no internal correspondence. Everybody is a foreign correspondent. So how on earth do you really facilitate change when the viewpoint is so limited from the outside? Our goal is through what we're doing to kind of help shift that narrative and be able to drive that kind of a change.
And so just to go in a little bit more specifically on how we are doing this, this is the front page of our publication right now. We are an independent, nonpartisan publication. We are a member of the Institute for Nonprofit News, which is a professional network. Most nonprofit news organizations that you might consume stories from are members. We've published over 500 stories by over 200 writers in 28 states, plus Canada. We're really proud to have that contribution and hoping to be able to expand that, and 10 contributing writers so far. And so what we do is that, our basic stance is that we want to provide an opportunity for first-time writers in addition to writers with experience, because when you're inside prison, and depending on where you are, what state you're in, the level of programming is completely different. And so we wanted to make sure that men and women with stories in areas where they don't have programming to teach writing can still get their stories out. And so our basic stance is we try to publish a little bit of as much as possible, as long as they don't violate our very basic policies. But then we also want to make sure that the best writers are bubbling up as well. And so we have a contributing writers program where if they have a certain number of stories that are featured, we invite them to be contributing writers. That gives them a stronger affiliation with us. It's something we invite them to incorporate into their bios. And then those are the writers we identify to be the first to offer any training programs, and also ultimately train them with intention to become correspondents. And I just want to say that there's all kinds of writing from inside prison, and there's a big creative writing community as well. And we think that there's absolutely a space for that. What we're trying to do is it's really help provide support for the writing, for stories that can be published in mainstream media. Shaheen and I have been doing this have been journalists for 20 years, and we know that we couldn't get here without all the support that we've had. The education, of course, but even once you go into a newsroom, you have a lot of editing support. You have a lot of, you have the bureau chief, you have senior editors, you have a lot of people who help make that piece as good as it can be. And none of us, no journalist can do what we do without that. And so that's the piece that we're trying to provide. So, we have our publication. We see it as a starting point. We see it as a legitimate publication, but we also, it's also we use it for educational purpose as well. And our end goal, of course, is to help them put together stories through collaborations with us on their own to be published in mainstream media. And so this is just an example of where our writers have been published over the last year.
But ultimately, and I really want to emphasize this, we started as an educational initiative, and that is still very much at the heart of what we do, because you cannot do this work, you cannot write with the nuance and the sophistication that you need to get the attention of the public, to get the attention of mainstream media without having some of that that training. And that's what we're doing with the launch of PJP J School. It is an intro to journalism correspondence curriculum with different modules that kind of go through a lot of the things that we learned in school, but that we also kind of learned on the job. Because for us, PJPJ School is a way of supporting these writers and giving them some of the mentorship and training that we received when we actually went into the newsroom. We have, it's basically done through handouts and style guides and different types of exercises. We have a newsletter written by a veteran journalist who basically breaks down a lot of these different aspects of journalism, explains the terminology, explains the motivation, why we do things a certain way, which I think is really helpful and is something that we kind of learned on the job. We are also a contributor for PEN America's handbook for writers in prison in their journalism section, which is going inside. And we're also creating journalism videos with the University of Denver for their educational channel, which goes across Colorado in order to get into prisons and to start developing journalism and prison newspapers within the state. And we hope to kind of expand that as well. At the end of the day, it's really about, understanding that people who receive educational programs inside, they have a 43% lower odds of returning to prison than those who do not. So it actually just makes good sense. It makes sense when it comes to the fact that, remember, we are the country with the highest rate of recidivism, to give these types of programming to them that also provide very specific skill sets that can be transferred to absolutely any type of job, any type of career upon return, and really does improve the odds of them staying out of prison.
And we think that the time is really right for writers to get out there more and be a part of that broader conversation. 71% of Americans favor reducing prison population, and of course, we all know the racial reckoning in the U.S. has brought attention to disparities in incarceration, education, and media representation. And so I think that it's the time is right. Late last year, Loretta Chow, who is at the American Journalism Project, put out a story on Neiman Lab with her predictions for journalism for this coming year. And one of the things she said was that making journalism more equitable will require a more inclusive definition of what it means to be a journalist. We need to stop being precious about how we do it. And she cited the Prison Journalism Project as an example of an organization that is reinventing journalism. And we really believe that, journalism is elitist, and it's very closed, and it's very competitive, and as long as those things are true, it's hard for new voices to break in, especially when they don't come with that traditional journalism. So we have a lot of plans and a lot of projects we want to tackle. And this is just a list of some of the ones that are on our radar right now. We just yesterday announced that we are starting a Story of the Week pick, and we are going to start paying for those stories. This is something that Shaheen and I really believe in from the very beginning, that our writers shouldn't be writing just for exposure, but that they should be paid. And we're an all volunteer team right now. Our funds are limited, and so this is one story a week is what we can do right now, but we hope to eventually be able to pay for every featured story. And then, other things on our radar. I was just granted a fellowship from the Reynolds Journalism Institute at the University of Missouri to create a framework for collaborative journalism with our writers. But we really see potential here where our writers can provide a lot of observation. Their biggest reporting resource at their disposal is their own observations, what they see, what they're hear, what they're experiencing around them, and that's material that outside journalists just don't have. On the other hand, inside reporters don't have access to data. Their ability to do investigative reporting is really, quite frankly, very limited, because they're also in a situation where they can be retaliated against. And so by combining the two, we think that the stories will be deeper and more nuanced and more powerful as a result. And then, one of the things on our radar is we would love to start an annual Excellence in Prison Journalism Award. Doesn't exist right now, but be a way of recognizing this as an important contribution to journalism.
Yeah, and one of the other things we really want to do is to make sure that the material that we have is not just for the outside audience. We really want to make sure that our writers inside also get to see what their peers are doing. And as part of that, we're creating a best of anthology, an annual anthology that kind of showcases stories that are really, really impactful. We're also starting to develop a textbook. It's a first of its kind prison reporter's guide to journalism. And part of it incorporates the whole comic book graphic novel style, because we are aware as educators that people have very different learning styles. So we want to make sure that our material is accessible to everyone, and also be able to create different types of graphic novels with our writers' stories. We're super excited about launching a podcast. That is something that we're working on right now, in the process of developing it and putting it together. And we're calling it The 1/4, to reflect the 25% of the world's population behind bars that we hold. And we're also in conversations for doing different documentaries that would kind of allow our men and women inside to sort of share their narratives and tell their stories. So there are a ton of opportunities, tons of things that are in the works that we're doing, but we never want to take anything away from our writers and what their experience is. So I really wanted to just kind of leave you with our editorial associate and contributing writer for the Prison Journalism Project, Marcus Henderson, also known as Wally, and he's the editor-in-chief of the San Quentin News. And he wrote this for us. And the first time I read it, it really hit me very, very hard. So I wanted to share this with you guys and then open it up for questions. But he wrote, "They say the pen is mightier than the sword. True. The pen can kill you in the name of penance. The pen can pen ideas and dogma as the ink runs dry. Or one can get ink on in the pen, telling life stories while serving life sentences." And I think that Wally really hits it on the head with what our potential is to be able to do more, to share these stories, and what their potential is inside to get their narratives out. So with that, I just wanted to show you how to get in touch with us. Both of our emails, we answer emails, so feel free to get in touch. And as we mentioned, we are an all volunteer run organization, so we're always looking for help. But please follow us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And please reach out if you have any comments or questions. But for now, we'd love to answer anything we can from anybody that's here. Thank you.
Benjamin.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing. I think it's a really, really inspiring story. And as a psychology student myself, I would see writing itself is very valuable in bringing the psychological benefits to the incarcerated people, and the writing process itself is super beneficial. So I was really impressed by sharing. And I do have a question though. So when you bring those courses into the prison, how would you reach out to the people in the prison, and how would you introduce these projects to these people, and how would you select the incarcerated people to participate
in the educational program and specifically? Yeah, that's a great question. We are working with different prison education programs around the country, but beyond that, what we do is we've gotten this amazing network of just writers inside that have been regularly writing for us. And so every single entry, every single person that writes us gets a response. It takes some time, but we respond to them. We provide them. We've been providing educational material since to them. Anytime they gave us anything, we would send them handouts. We've created style guides. We've created a primer that sort of breaks down the journalism process. We encourage them to write more. We send them their stories back so they can see what changes have been made. And as part of that, we will reach out to them. Some are just happy to get their stuff published, and they're good with that. And it's just, as you mentioned, a therapeutic kind of cathartic way to get their stories out. Others actually, a lot of them are really interested in taking their writing to the next levels. They see the potential to, hey, can we get into the Marshall Project? Hey, can we get into, the Washington Post? And our writers have gotten into those publications, working with us. So for them, we actually reach out to them, and our plan is to say, this is the PJPJ school is available. Do you want to be part of it? This is the way it's going to go. These are the modules. This is the work. And please be a part of our cohort. And given the response we've been getting just to the educational material and the stuff that's been up there, we're really confident. People are excited inside. I mean, they're thirsting for education. And I think this makes it easier because it's direct to mail. They get it and they don't have to necessarily wait for a program to open up. That's a great question. Thank you.
And I also think that there's this population. I mean, I think anybody who's done any work with criminal justice knows how disenfranchised it is. And so part of the goal, or part of I think what happens working with us as part of our community, is that they do feel like they're part of the community, that they're part of this world, and that their voice matters. And so for sure, I mean, I think totally see your point. Morgan.
Okay, so I had a very similar question to Benjamin, but just more pointedly. So I am currently working on organizing some groups for prison abolition and prison education in my home state of Oklahoma. And we're really running into like a lot of issues with, you know, getting in contact with those incarcerated and actually, you know, like presenting like our materials, our like flyers and information that we have for programs to them. So I guess like I have a similar question to Benjamin, but more on like the logistical side, if you have any advice or information.
I think, you know, one of our, when we first started 2 years ago, Shaheen and I were thinking, you know, the first thing we have to do is establish relationships with prison administrations and education departments and get their cooperation and consent and get in that way. And I think when the pandemic happened and everything was closed, it opened us up to the possibility and the ability to communicate with the writers directly. And so to you know, there already is an established I don't know if channel is the right word, but there's a track record of writers anywhere in the country being able to submit stories to places like Penn. There are a lot of organizations that will publish different kinds of writing from prisons. And so the way we started was we put out a call for submissions in Prison Legal News, which is one of the most widely read publications inside prison. And then we just started getting flooded with submissions. And when we publish something, we send back an acknowledgement letter with a copy of their story, since they don't have access online. And at the end of every letter, we always say, please spread the word. Please let other people around you who are interested in writing know that we're interested in their stories. And then over time, we've been connecting with prison education groups that have a track record, have been able to bring materials inside, and they're able to bring our submissions information inside the walls. And so we've gotten stuff that way. And so, you know, it's I think sometimes, depending on the state, depending on the prison, the mail back and forth is not easy. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes it doesn't get in at all. And I think we just, and Shaheen and I know that as things start moving back to normal, one of the things that we do want is to create relationships with, you know, probably starting with some of the more open-minded prison administration systems where they have supported writing education programs. I think for us, it's a little bit different because we're not an advocacy group. We're firmly not an advocacy group. We're a journalism organization, which, you know, probably in some states, like it's just as bad. But we don't, you know, we're not trying to gather support for a specific cause. You know, what we try to say is we want their voices. We want all kinds of voices side. And so it does align with, you know, many of their educational objectives as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
I see a question from Emily. She's asking, have you met restrictions from prison administrators on materials sent for publishing by incarcerated contributing writers? Yes. So it's every prison is different, every jail is different, every administrator is different. So yes, we've received some, we've generally had pretty good luck with getting stuff in and out, but we have seen cases, especially with some of our more prolific writers, the ones that are kind of just really laying it out, that in their cases, there have been some levels, I mean, their mail is being held up longer, or, you know, there's been some level of kind of retaliation against them. Some of our material does not get in. I mean, we send so much back, a lot of it comes back to us undeliverable, even though, you know, they're there. So it can vary from place to place. Every prison may have a different number of like pages that they're allowed in. So we generally try to keep things between 5 pages back and forth to be able to get it in. But yes, we have had some cases where we've seen our writers have told us that the prison is not as forthcoming or as more likely to inhibit their mail or inhibit their ability to be able to get stuff out. You know, we don't say everything on JPay or stuff like that. We have to be very, very careful because everything is monitored. But for the most part, though, knock on wood, we've been okay with that. And the other question is, this is because we thought about it. We don't want to get anybody in trouble, but at the same time, they have agency, and the men and women inside say that to us. They say, you know, we're not infants. We need to have the chance to be able to tell our own stories. And a lot of them are saying, I'm willing to take the risk of getting to a little bit of trouble if I, you know, it's like good trouble. You know, I would rather make sure that I have a chance to get my story out. But yeah, it's not always easy for sure.
But you know, what I will add though is that law is on their side. They have First Amendment rights inside. They are allowed to publish, and they technically can't block mail because unless the content they think is dangerous or somehow violates a policy, but they can't block something just because they don't like it. What I will say is that we showed you in an example of the lifestyle story, we showed you a story about onions, and that was a story from a writer in Florida about trying to steal onions for the sauce man. It's a great story. You guys should read it. It's the key word is onions. There's no other story about onions. But the funny thing was that when we tried to send him a copy of his story back, it didn't make it inside, and we think it's because it was really essentially a story about him committing a crime inside, right? So I could see why they don't want a story about crime coming back inside. At the same time, it's just funny because it was his own story.
Yeah. And I see
Emily, you had a follow-up question?
I see a question from Logan, or no, Emily, go on, sorry.
Sorry, I just had a very quick follow-up question, just based off of also like what you were saying, Yukari, about the First Amendment rights in prison. So is there any form of like prior restraint that can be used by like prison officials against the writing that incarcerated individuals put out, contributing writers like submit, like let's say like with the story about the onions, like would the officials, like prison administrators, have any right to review that material before you published it, or do they retain the like no prior restraint First Amendment rights?
They can't. I mean, they don't have any rights to send. Well, so what they do, or what they say they do, is they reveal all outgoing mail, and so whether it's physical, like snail mail, or whether it's electronic through the JPay, Securus Technologies JPay system, or CoreLink, or some other electronic mode. So they can potentially screen content that way. To our knowledge, we've never had a story not make it to us because somebody had pulled the content. Sometimes stories are delayed. It'll take a few weeks for them to get to us. We have more trouble getting things back in. And so we haven't. And then what I will say is that San Quentin News, which has a monthly newspaper, there's been very specific legal decisions that say that they do have First Amendment rights and they can publish what they want. At San Quentin and at the California Department of Rehabilitation, Corrections and Rehabilitation, what they will say is that they will not, they may step in if there's a story that they think will pose a security risk. And to my knowledge, it happened once recently because there was concern about the risk to certain very specific individuals, but in the 11 years that they've been running this newspaper, it's never happened. Besides that, they've been able to publish Black Panther stories, and so I think no, not to our knowledge.
I think I see a question from Logan. I know if you know anything about how this could benefit people after they're released from prison, job-wise specifically. I know incarcerated people who are firefighters who can't be firefighters after they're released because they have a criminal record. Is this something that would be an issue within journalism? We have some amazing formerly incarcerated journalists right now, award-winning journalists. Carrie Blakinger is one. Lawrence Bartley actually runs the News Inside, which is part of the Marshall Project. It's a newsletter of stories that's sent inside facilities. And right now with the incarcerated journalists, we have a number, John J. Lennon, who is one of our advisors on our board. He is currently still incarcerated in Sullivan in New York, and he's just done this amazing work for the New York Times and the Washington Post and Esquire and all sorts of places. So from that perspective, no. From that perspective, it's not going to be like a hindrance, like they will stop you from doing that. What is a problem is the mindset that continues within mainstream media as well. And that's one of the things that Yukari and I are working very, very hard to change, because there is still this very old mindset and mentality that if we're doing a story about prison in general, that it's a very niche kind of story, that we did one, it's a one-off, we did it, we don't have to do another one for 6 months, right? And they don't see it as the community journalism that Yukari and I see it as. The other thing is that it's so often weighted towards the crime and towards focusing on an individual's crime, and within that, there's these lack of, people still have this lack of credibility. Well, are you sure that happened, and things like that. So there are some sort of stereotypes and barriers that need to be broken, but we are seeing journalists enter this field after having served time. And the good thing about journalism is that those skill sets can be used in a variety of different ways. So even if they don't decide to be journalists, being able to write well, being able to research, being able to critically think, being able to organize information, this is stuff that any employer anywhere wants their people to do. And so there's a benefit to that. And you can talk about San Quentin guys, because they
I mean, it's difficult. I mean, Shaheen was able to rattle the names of the 5 best known journalists, and really there aren't very many beyond that. I mean, what I would say is that it is an industry that is incredibly competitive, even if you've had the best journalism education and a strong and some good experience. It's a hard industry to break into, and I do think that one of the challenges that as we do this for longer, we may encounter is that we our journalists inside, as we train them, even if we train them, and at San Quentin News as well, they are very good journalists, but they're gaining a lot of experience in very specific tools, which is observation, interview, critical thinking. They're not they obviously don't have experience and don't have a way of gaining experience in some of the more nitty-gritty tools like data reporting, investigative reporting, how to file FOIA reports. Some of them do that, but in general, like how to really to take stories beyond your own community and turn them into meaningful journalism. And so those are the skills that that's the gap that would probably that is posing the challenge for example, for San Quentin News guys that are getting out. I think that as our writers get to that point, we would definitely love to be able to provide some sort of bridge, educational bridge, to help support writers who want to embrace it as a career. But honestly, I mean, I think as Shaheen said, it's more about the skills. The journalism skills can apply for anything to make them successful. They're in California, the San Quentin News reporters are actually they're gaining a very steady track record of being released early or being pardoned, but having their sentences commuted, because the skills that they've shown in leadership, critical thinking, et cetera, have are being recognized. And so we think that they can gain skills to make them more successful. We'd like to be able to help writers who want to make it and turn it into their careers, but reentry has so many challenges for many of the men and women in terms of just securing a home, health insurance or health, work, having to check in with parole. I mean, journalism would be tough for sure.
I don't think I see any questions.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, guys. Please do check out our website. We have a monthly newsletter where it's kind of a digest of some of our best stories of the month. So we'd love for you to sign up and I'll follow us on social media.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for having us.
Thank
care.
you both so much.
Thanks, Emily.
And for answering all of those questions. That was super helpful and really inspiring. So thank you for taking on this mission.
Well, have a fantastic weekend, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you too. Bye.
Thank you.